I want to tell you a story about a man named Jonah. Jonah was a prophet, someone chosen by God to deliver his messages. Now, you might think that being a prophet is a great honor, and it is, but it's not always easy. Sometimes the messages God asks his prophets to deliver are not what people want to hear, and sometimes even the prophets themselves don't want to carry the message. For Jonah, he was one of those prophets. You see, one day, God came to Jonah with a command. He said, "Jonah, I need you to go to the city of Nineveh. People there have turned away from me. Their wickedness is great, and I have seen it. Tell them that if they do not change their ways, I will destroy their city in 40 days. Now, Nineveh wasn't just any city. It was massive, one of the largest cities in the world at the time, and it was known for its cruelty, greed, and its violence. Jonah knew all about Nineveh, and the truth was, he didn't want to go. He didn't want to warn them. He didn't think they deserved a second chance. You might wonder why. Why wouldn't Jonah want to give them a chance to repent? Well, to be honest, Jonah didn't like the people of Nineveh. He didn't think they deserved God's mercy. And perhaps more than that, he was afraid. Afraid that if he went there, they wouldn't listen. Afraid that something bad might happen to him. So Jonah made a decision. He ran. He didn't argue with God. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked in the opposite direction of Nineveh. Jonah went to the port city of Joppa, found a ship that was headed far, far away, and paid for passage. The ship was bound for Tarshish, a place at the other end of the known world. It was about as far away from Nineveh as Jonah could get. Now, I imagine Jonah was feeling pretty sure of himself at this point. Maybe he thought he could outrun God's command. Maybe he thought he could hide. But, as you'll soon see, you can't run from God, not for long. Jonah found a spot below deck, and despite everything, he fell into a deep sleep. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he thought that if he could just close his eyes, everything would be fine. But it wasn't long before trouble found him. You see, while Jonah slept, God sent a storm. And not just any storm. A storm like the sailors had never seen before. The sky grew dark, the wind howled, and the waves began to crash against the ship. The sailors, seasoned as they were, began to panic. They threw cargo overboard, hoping to make the ship lighter, but it didn't help. The storm kept getting worse. It was as if the sea itself wanted to swallow the ship whole. The sailors, desperate, began to cry out to their gods, praying for mercy. But the storm didn't stop. And all the while, Jonah was still asleep. Finally, the captain went below deck and shook Jonah awake. "Wake up. How can you sleep through this storm? Get up and call upon your God. Maybe he will save us." Jonah woke, and in that moment, he knew this storm was his fault. He knew it was because he had run from God. So he went up on deck, and the sailors cast lots, a way of seeing who was to blame for their trouble. And the lot fell on Jonah. The sailors looked at him, confused and frightened. "Who are you?" they asked. "Where do you come from? What have you done to bring this upon us?" Jonah looked at them and said, "I am a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This storm is because of me. I am running from him." The sailors were terrified. Jonah's God was powerful. They could see that now. "What should we do?" they asked. "How can we stop this storm?" And Jonah, knowing there was only one way, said, "Throw me into the sea. If you do, the storm will stop." But the sailors didn't want to do it. They didn't want Jonah's blood on their hands. So they rowed as hard as they could, trying to make it to shore. But the storm grew even more violent. The waves rose higher, the wind screamed louder, and finally, they had no choice. They prayed to Jonah's God, saying, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us guilty for this." And with heavy hearts, they picked Jonah up and threw him into the sea. The moment Jonah hit the water, the storm stopped. The sea became calm, and the sky cleared. The sailors, amazed, offered sacrifices to Jonah's God, vowing to worship him. But Jonah began to sink, deeper and deeper into the cold, dark water. He thought this was the end, but God had other plans. As Jonah sank, a great fish appeared, a huge, monstrous creature sent by God. The fish opened its mouth and swallowed Jonah whole. Now, imagine for a moment what it must have been like for Jonah inside the belly of that fish. It was dark, wet, and cold. He had no idea where he was or how long he would be there. He couldn't move, couldn't escape. All he could do was think and pray he did. For 3 days and 3 nights, Jonah prayed inside the belly of the fish. He cried out to God, admitting his wrongs, asking for forgiveness, and finally offering his obedience. God, he prayed, you heard me when I was in distress. When I thought I was lost, you saved me. I will do what you have asked. I will go where you sent me. And God heard Jonah's prayer. God saw that Jonah's heart had changed. On the 3rd day, commanded the fish to spit Jonah out onto dry land. The fish obeyed, and Jonah was cast out of its belly, landing on the shore, exhausted but alive. Jonah sat on the beach for a while, catching his breath, no doubt reflecting on everything that had happened. And then, with a deep sigh, he got up and made his way to Nineveh. This time, there was no running, no hesitation. Jonah knew what he had to do. When Jonah arrived in Nineveh, the city was even bigger than he had imagined. It was so vast, it would take 3 days to walk from one side to the other. And the people, well, they were as wicked as Jonah had feared. But Jonah didn't let that stop him. He walked through the streets, calling out the message God had given him. In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed unless you turn from your evil ways. Repent, or your city will fall. At first, the people of Nineveh were shocked. They didn't know what to make of this strange man, walking through their streets, telling them that their city was about to be destroyed. But slowly, Jonah's words began to sink in. The people of Nineveh believed Jonah. They believed that God was angry with them. They believed that if they didn't change, their city would be destroyed. So they began to repent. They stopped their wickedness. They stopped hurting each other. They cried out to God for mercy. Even the king of Nineveh heard Jonah's message. When the king heard what Jonah had said, he took off his royal robes, put on sackcloth, rough, uncomfortable cloth used to show humility, and sat down in the dust. The king sent out a decree to all the people of Nineveh. He said, "Let everyone, people and animals alike, not eat or drink anything. Let us all wear sackcloth and cry out to God. Let us turn from our evil ways. Maybe God will have mercy on us. Maybe he will spare our city." And you know what? God did have mercy on them. When God saw that the people of Nineveh had truly changed their ways, that they had turned from their evil and sought his forgiveness, he decided not to destroy the city. He showed them mercy, just as he shows mercy to all who turn to him. Now you would think that Jonah would be happy about this, wouldn't you? He had come to Nineveh, he had delivered God's message, and the people had listened. They had repented, and the city was saved. But Jonah wasn't happy. In fact, Jonah was angry. He sat outside the city, sulking, upset that God had shown mercy to the people of Nineveh. He said to God, "I knew you would do this. I knew you were a merciful God, slow to anger, full of compassion. That's why I didn't want to come here in the first place. I knew you would forgive them." Jonah was so upset, he said, "It would be better for me to die than to see Nineveh spared." But God wasn't done teaching Jonah yet. As Jonah sat there, pouting in the hot sun, God made a plant grow next to him. The plant grew quickly, and its large leaves gave Jonah shade from the heat. Jonah was glad for the plant. It gave him comfort. But the next day, God sent a worm to eat the plant, and it withered and died. The sun rose high in the sky, and a hot wind blew. Jonah was miserable. Once again, Jonah cried out, "It would be better for me to die than to live like this." And then God spoke to Jonah. "Jonah," he said, "is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" Jonah replied, "Yes, it is. I am so angry I wish I were dead." And God said, "You cared about this plant, though you did not make it grow. It came up in a night and perished in a night. Shouldn't I care about Nineveh, that great city with more than 120,000 people who don't know right from wrong? Shouldn't I care about them and also their animals?" And so Jonah learned a powerful lesson that day. He learned that God's mercy isn't just for the people we like or the people we think deserve it. God's mercy is for everyone. We might try to run from God's plans. We might try to hide from what He asks us to do. But in the end, God's love will always find us, just as it found Jonah, just as it found the people of Nineveh. And that is the story of Jonah.